Hi, I'm Marc Stevens, author of Government Indicted. The website, of course, marcstevens.net. I want to talk today about defending against a tax audit, the use of strawmen and bad logic. So if you're being attacked by the tax agents and they want to do an audit, don't just accept it and go in there. Challenge them, and challenge them every step of the way. I will point out that if you're being attacked by the IRS, if they file against you in court to enforce their summons, you will lose. That's not because what I'm going to present has no merit. It's because the system is rigged. You will not be permitted to defend yourself. And an example of that, I mentioned a few weeks ago on the No State Project how Lawrence O'Neill out of the Fresno District Court wouldn't allow a defense. That's the way they do it. They just bark their orders at you, threaten you with jail, and regardless of what you've presented, they don't listen to it. They lie through their teeth. So if the IRS files against you in court, you will lose. There's nothing you can do to stop them. It's rigged. But while it's an administrative process, you have a chance. And so this is what I want to go through. And you do have a much better chance if it's a state attack as opposed to the feds. The feds just, there's no pretense of fairness at all with them. This is dealing particularly when I spoke on the phone. This was the 14th of June, a couple of days ago. Actually, yesterday, I guess it was. And I started with the agent who launched the attack, and she was not. When we're defending against these attacks, always stick to the Socratic method. Just take the arguments that they're using against you and challenge them on it. And so their main argument against you is if you're physically in Washington, the Constitution laws apply. So I spoke with the lead agent initially, and she agreed that was what they were operating under. She's physically, the target, the victim, is physically in Washington. Our laws apply. That's the basis of jurisdiction. I asked her for evidence of that, and she didn't have anything. So she thought it was more appropriate I speak to the supervisor. And what was good was that she understood enough that she didn't have any evidence to support her claim, so she did put a hold on the account so it would not escalate. So that's always a big plus right there. So that's something you always want to look for. Once they admit that they don't have any evidence, if you're dealing with somebody with some level of honesty that isn't emotionally attached to the job, then you can usually get them to stop the proceedings so that they don't escalate. So the computer's not going to just keep spitting out an escalation. So I spoke with the supervisor, a woman named Lindsay. This is a supervisor, by the way. I already told her that the agent conducting the audit admitted to having no evidence. She agreed that the physical location in Washington proved the Constitution and laws applied. I asked if she had any evidence to prove that claim was true, and she actually said it was the RCW, which is the Revised Code of Washington. She said that's the best that she could do. After initially feigning ignorance that she didn't understand what I was asking. And I don't think it's a very difficult question. Even the harshest of critics they understand the question, they just think I'm an idiot for asking it. So when you get a stupid statement like that you're asking for facts proving the Constitution applies to someone just because they're physically in Washington, and they don't answer you directly, they give you a non-responsive retort such as the RCW, that's ridiculous, especially since they had already admitted prior that the authority for the RCW was the Constitution. So the Constitution is supposed to be the supreme law of the land. So it's kind of backwards to say that the RCW is proof of the Constitution. So what you want to do is you always want to get a clarifying question in here to make sure that that's exactly what they mean when they say that. So that's what I did. I said, so the question is, let me see if I understand you correctly. You're saying that proof the Constitution applies to the victim is the RCW. She said, yes. Oh. Okay. Wow. I'll put up the actual RCW she was talking about. But first keep in mind, it's not responsive. Absolutely not responsive to the question. So that's one way you can go about it. I think this is a little better because you let her dig a deeper hole for herself. Okay, you tighten that noose just a little bit more on them. And they're doing it themselves. They could just play it straight the first time. So when they say that, yes, the RCW is proof the Constitution applies because she's physically in Washington. All you got to do is lean on your Socratic method, which you're just asking questions, of course. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. So I opted for the how question because I've done this a lot, and this is a really effective way to put the agent into a corner. So I said, can you tell me exactly how the RCW proves the Constitution applies to the victim just because she's physically in Washington? And, of course, this is where things usually go bad because all you're doing is calling the agent out on this BS. So, of course, she couldn't answer. She repeated her argument, but what she does now is she tries to raise a really bad straw man. So instead of answering the question directly and telling me how the RCW proves the Constitution applies, she then raises the straw man saying, so let me see if I got you straight. You're arguing that the Constitution and RCW do not apply. As well, first of all, I'm not arguing at this point. I'm asking a question that I'd like you to answer. If you answer the questions like your employee did, then I would argue, or my position would be, that all I'm doing is pointing out that you and your employee who launched the attack, who started all this, have no evidence. In fact, your employee admitted to not having any evidence. That's my point. So what she does is, since she's unable to prove it, she launches into the familiar, this is where they start making personal attacks against you. She says that she's had similar conversations and that we don't get anywhere with these conversations. I said, well, that's because you're not answering a question. You're not being an adult and you're not answering, the question. Although she does admit she would not conduct an audit without jurisdiction or authority, she still wants to get into the procedure. It's like this whole disconnect. She won't conduct the audit without authority, but she can't present any evidence. So what she wants to do is now go back to the original retort and get specific and say that section 51.48.040 of the RCW, and it's linked in the article too, is the proof that I'm asking for. Now, section 51.48.040 actually proves the Constitution applies. Now, I mentioned, of course, that has to do with inspection of records. It doesn't even mention the Constitution. And then the typical, this is what you have to expect when you're defending against these. So if you are attacked, you're going to see all the same stupid responses that I'm laying out here. They'll give you the same ones. It's like they rehearsed it. Because the big insult comes, nothing I say will satisfy you, Marc, which is a nice way of insulting me, I guess. Well, that isn't really so nice, but it is an insult. It's a way of saying that I'm retarded and that nothing she says will satisfy me. That's not true. If you say you have no evidence, I'll accept that, especially since your due process and you've already admitted you shouldn't proceed without evidence and jurisdiction. But to keep giving me non-responsive answers and then try to put it off on me by insulting me, which is why the critics have to lie, they have to insult, because they don't have any evidence. Those who have evidence don't have to resort to, nothing I say will satisfy you, Marc. Okay? Those with evidence present the evidence. They don't have to insult. I've said it a million times. If they had the proof, they just give it to me. And you can see right here, I'll have and I have it linked in section 51.48.040 has to do with the inspection of employers' records. Doesn't say a word about the Constitution. That's exactly why she can't prove that, she can't show how that section, inspection of employers' records, proves the Constitution applies, because it doesn't. And anyone who thinks that is just wrong. I mean, that's ridiculous. The Constitution, she says, is the authority for the police power to do these things. But if the Constitution, if there's no evidence it applies, but then they turn around and try to say that the RCW is proof that the Constitution applies, where? Even if we accept that it has any validity whatsoever, challenge it. Don't take their words at face value. Always challenge it. So is your position this section of the RCW proves the Constitution applies? Great. Can you read from this section? Show me how? Where? Where the hell does it say anywhere in here? See how easy it is to defend against this stuff? That's why they have to rig the game when you get to court, because there is no defense. They can't meet their burden of proof. It's impossible, which is why people like the scumbag O'Neill, who's a federal judge in Fresno, does not allow any kind of defense. You either do as he says or he puts you in jail. That's, that's his own words. So from that point, all she could do when I asked the question, exactly how does the RCW prove the Constitution applies, is to keep saying the RCW is the proof. The RCW is the proof. Hold on. How? She can't answer the question. So at this point, she is going to bail on the call and tell me that somebody more appropriate is going to call me to answer the question. So she's very comfortable making the accusations, not so much when it comes to actually proving that they're true. So I did speak with Lucas. He at least admitted he had no evidence, couldn't prove it. Suggested I speak to someone at the Attorney General's office, and I asked him to set that up for me, and he tried. And of course, they said no. They don't have evidence. They're not willing to discuss it with me, and I can understand that. You're a criminal. Why be called out that you can't meet your burden of proof? So I called the AG's office myself up in Washington, spoke to a David Hankins, and I'm pretty certain that this is the same guy. If it's not, I'll have to change that. But I think it's the same guy. Now, he also readily agreed that if you're physically in Washington, their rules, their Constitution apply to you. But when I asked him if he had any proof that that was true, that opinion was true, he said that if you went anywhere, any other so-called state like Idaho, you went to Oregon or California, that's the way it would be. I said, are you really going to appeal to tradition? That's just the way other people do it? Do you really think that answers the question? No, that doesn't sound like evidence. And he agreed by saying, but he also said, well, that's just the way it's done. Oh, so you are appealing to tradition. But how does that prove? It doesn't. He tried to make a claim that when somebody goes into Washington, they're invoking the protection of the state. Well, first of all, no. You're assuming that they're invoking the protection. Two, they're not there to protect. People who are forcing you to pay them are not there to protect you. And even the courts have held that explicitly, that those co-government have no duty to protect you. So he decided to end it by saying anything else. Anything else. So to summarize, look, when you're being attacked by the tax agents, state or federal, don't just take it lying down. Challenge them every step of the way. If they think that they have jurisdiction, make them prove it. They have the burden of proof. They're supposed to be bringing it in good faith for a legitimate purpose under the law. Well, the agents will admit to you, like Evan Moses did, which was ignored by the scumbag Lawrence O'Neill, who would not allow this man to defend himself, admittedly not qualified to make these determinations, admittedly not qualified to say that it was for a legitimate purpose under the law. But pieces of crap, pieces of filth, this excrement like Lawrence O'Neill routinely allow them to get away with it because the system's rigged. But if you keep it at the administrative level, you still stand a chance. More so with the state agents than you do with the IRS, which is kind of just autopilot, just corrupt beyond, just grossly corrupt. But their opinions are backed by guns, not evidence and reason. And you can challenge them, and I think it strongly suggest that you do. Even if you ultimately just comply with them, don't make it easy for these people. Okay? You stick to asking them the facts that support their claim. You stay on point and don't accept non-responsive answers. Always ask your clarifying questions and rely on the Socratic method. How? If you think that the RCW is proof the Constitution applies, tell me how it proves that. Explain the process. How does a statute prove the Constitution applies? See, when you read it back to them or you say it back, it loses all the punch. It doesn't sound nearly as good coming from me as it does from them, at least in their heads. Again, my name is Marc Stevens. If you disagree with what I presented here, if you think there is evidence proving the Constitution and laws apply to someone just because they're physically in Washington, please contact me at markstevens.net.